Hello, I hope you're having a good day. Today we're going to watch the movie called The 13th Floor. In Los Angeles, 1937, the millionaire Hannon writes a letter to a hotel employee, confessing that he has made a dangerous discovery and will likely be killed. After finishing, he goes to the ballroom and hands the letter to the waiter Ashton, indicating that someone named Douglas will come to pick it up later. Intrigued, Ashton opens the envelope and is disturbed by its contents. Meanwhile, Hannon returns home and lies down with his wife. Suddenly, the room disappears, and he wakes up in a laboratory in 1999. He discovers that the 1937 city and its inhabitants are part of a virtual reality simulator developed by his company. Confused, he leaves the lab and goes to his favorite bar, where he drinks and takes his medication while some unsettling men watch him. Then, from a payphone, he leaves a message for Douglas on his answering machine. The call is interrupted by a mysterious figure at the back door. Hannon, surprised to recognize him, follows him into an alley. Just as he's about to reveal his discovery, the stranger stabs him, killing him instantly. The next morning, Douglas, his protege, listens to the messages on his machine before going to the bathroom, where he finds blood in the sink and a stained shirt in the trash. Among the messages is one from the police, requesting that he urgently report to the station. Without listening to the others, he rushes to the station where Detective McBain shows him a devastated body. Douglas confirms it is Hannon and explains to McBain that he had worked with him for 6 years and that they were close friends. Together, they go to Hannon's office. The detective asks about the company's projects, but Douglas only mentions that they work with software, revealing nothing more. Then they notice a woman named Jane in another room. Douglas is surprised to hear her say she's Hannon's daughter, as he had never mentioned having children. He also feels like he's seen her before. While McBain interrogates Jane, Douglas visits the 13th floor, where Whitney, a programmer mourning Hannon, explains the simulation they were working on. Hannon used to visit frequently, even though the first test was still months away. When Douglas asks if he knows Jane, Whitney says he does not. Returning to the lobby, Douglas sees Jane get into a taxi and becomes suspicious. He asks the receptionist where she's staying and decides to follow her. Meanwhile, McBain questions Whitney about the project. He explains that the simulation is populated by people who learn on their own, unaware that they are programs. Hannon chose to recreate 1937 Los Angeles because he wanted to relive his youth. At the hotel, Douglas confronts Jane about her last conversation with Hannon. She says she lived in France and that her father asked her to come to the U.S. to help shut down the company. Later, she meets with Hannon's lawyer and discovers that he made a last-minute change to his will. The company will go to Douglas. At the same time, McBain gives Douglas the same news. Both he and Jane are shocked. This change makes Douglas a suspect. He insists he didn't talk to Hannon the day of the murder, but McBain informs him that Hannon's phone card was used right before his death. At home, Douglas listens to the rest of the messages and discovers that Hannon mentions a hidden letter in the simulation. Hannon says he found something surprising, but the recording cuts off when he asks a mysterious person, "How did you find me?" Douglas rushes to the office and, after searching Hannon's computer, asks Whitney to connect it to the simulator. At first, Whitney refuses, warning of the danger, but Douglas insists. Either he killed Hannon and forgot, or someone is framing him. Whitney agrees, but only for 1 hour. Douglas convinces him to extend it to 2, despite the risk. Douglas lies down in the simulation chamber and, after flashing lights and data transfer, wakes up in virtual reality as a bank employee. Feeling strange, he rushes to the bathroom to recover. His boss notices his poor condition and gives him the day off. Outside, Douglas is amazed by the details of old Los Angeles, which looks incredibly real. According to Whitney, Hannon used the body of an antique store owner in Pasadena, so Douglas takes a taxi there. Upon arriving, he discovers that the owner, Grierson, is identical to Hannon. However, he doesn't recognize him, although he thinks he has seen him before. Douglas then goes to the hotel and asks the dancers about Hannon until one of them directs him to Ashton. To his surprise, Ashton looks exactly like Whitney, but Douglas says nothing and starts questioning him. Ashton explains that Hannon is a regular client who always seeks young girls, which unsettles Douglas. When asked about the letter, Ashton pretends not to know what he's talking about. Suddenly, Douglas starts to feel unwell. His time in the simulation is running out. He runs to the bathroom, convulses, and in a flash, wakes up dizzy in the laboratory. Meanwhile, in the simulation, Ashton notices that the body used by Douglas is confused, not knowing where he is or how he got there. In the lab, Whitney helps Douglas calm down and scolds him for staying 2 hours in the simulation. However, his mood improves when Douglas praises how realistic the virtual world is. The conversation becomes tense again when Douglas mentions that Hannon used the simulation to be with young girls. The moment is interrupted when a guard enters and announces that someone is asking for Douglas in the lobby. Douglas goes down and meets Tom, who says he saw Hannon at the bar the other night. He asks to speak in private, so Douglas takes him to the parking lot. Suddenly, Tom demands money, and when he doesn't get it, he punches Douglas while accusing him of taking Hannon. Douglas defends himself and slams Tom against a car window. Furious, Tom calls him crazy and one of the most wanted men in the U.S. before running away. Later, Douglas calls Jane and invites her to dinner. He tells her about Hannon's message but doesn't remember if he saw or spoke to him on the day of the murder. Jane advises him to tell everything to the police and stay away from the simulation, which might be affecting his memory. Douglas feels like he already knows Jane, but she avoids the topic. While dancing, Jane admits she also thinks she's seen him before. She explains that déjà vu can be a sign of love at first sight, and they kiss. That night, the police break into Douglas's apartment and arrest him as the prime suspect. At the station, McBain shows him footage of his car near the bar where the murder happened. According to the detective's theory, Douglas killed Hannon to prevent the company's closure. Tom also said he saw him leave the bar with Hannon, but the police found him dead hours later. Douglas spends the night in jail, but in the morning, Jane pays his bail by presenting an alibi. Determined to uncover the truth, Douglas returns to the lab and enters the simulation. He sets the timer to 2 hours but forgets to activate the countdown. The computer tries to warn him, but he's already inside. He appears in the virtual reality in the middle of a dance contest. He immediately abandons his partner and runs to the antique store, smashing the window with a rock to get Grierson's attention. At first, he refuses to talk, but Douglas tells him he can explain why he loses track of time and wakes up without remembering where he is. Grierson admits to having flashes of another life, and that his wife has noticed strange smells on his clothes. He also found something unusual under his bed, a briefcase with an elegant suit he never bought, nor remembers wearing, but that fits him perfectly. Douglas understands that Hannon stored it there for each session in the simulation. Together, they go to the hotel, where the staff calls Grierson Hannon. In the ballroom, he tries to remember, and upon seeing the young dancers, recalls that Hannon handed a letter to someone. When he points at the waiter, Ashton realizes it and sneaks away. Douglas follows him to the dressing room, where Ashton surprises him with a gun. He confesses to having read the letter and discovering that he is nothing more than an artificial creation. Following Hannon's instructions, he traveled to Tucson, past barricades, and found the edge of the world. There, he understood that his reality is fake. Desperate, Ashton demands that Douglas prove he's truly real. Laughing like a madman, Ashton shoots Douglas in the shoulder and the leg. Just as he's about to deliver the fatal shot, Douglas strikes him and escapes. A chase ensues as Ashton fires wildly, and Douglas wonders why the simulation hasn't ended. Ashton follows the blood trail to the pool, but Douglas ambushes and attacks him, takes his gun, and points it at his mouth, demanding the letter. Ashton gives it to him, but it's a trap. He captures him again and slams him against a pillar. Both fall into the water, where Ashton tries to drown him. Just as Douglas is about to lose consciousness, Whitney pulls him out of the simulation. Disoriented, Douglas punches Whitney before realizing he's back. He then tells him that the people in the simulation are as real as they are, with their own thoughts and emotions. He believes tampering with their minds is a mistake. Whitney tries to convince him they're just programs, but Douglas storms off angrily. At the hotel, McBain is waiting with news. Jane has disappeared. After investigating, he discovered that Hannon never had children and that there are no records of a Jane in either the U.S. or France. Alarmed, Douglas bribes a taxi driver who had taken Jane days before and finds out she went to a nearby neighborhood. Douglas keeps asking around until he finds a woman identical to Jane working as a cashier in a grocery store. However, she doesn't recognize him, though she admits his face looks familiar. With Ashton's story in mind, Douglas follows the path described in the letter and crosses several barriers until he reaches the edge of the world. What he finds leaves him speechless: a wall of code and wireframe structures, proof that his 1999 reality is as fake as 1937. This means he's not real either. Meanwhile, McBain locates the woman who looks like Jane, but she doesn't recognize him. Checking her records, her co-workers mention she's been going out at night and sleeping all day. At that moment, Jane takes control of that body, sees McBain, and hides. She then calls Douglas and asks to meet at Hannon's office. Moments later, Jane reveals the truth. There are thousands of virtual worlds, but theirs is the only one that created a simulation within a simulation. She didn't kill Hannon. She was sent after his death to pose as his daughter and inherit the company. Her mission was to shut it down, but Hannon tricked her by changing his will. Douglas's body stabbed Hannon, but it wasn't of his own will. It was controlled by an external user, her husband, David. Jane explains that David became addicted to the simulation and grew corrupted, even abusive. However, she believes that both Hannon and Douglas, having seen the end of the world, have shown signs of consciousness and are truly real. Since the simulation began, Jane has watched Douglas and fallen in love with him. But Douglas insists he isn't real and cannot be loved. To prove otherwise, Jane kisses him, and they end up making love. Meanwhile, Whitney enters the simulation and wakes up in Ashton's body. While driving, he tries to maneuver through traffic but crashes into some boxes. Seeing himself in the rearview mirror, the police surround him and ask for his license. Searching the glove compartment, he finds a gun and quickly hides it before handing over Ashton's wallet. The officer accepts his excuse about the car slipping in the rain and lets him go. However, before leaving, a noise in the trunk catches the officer's attention. When he opens it, he finds the bloodied body of the bank clerk tied up. He tries to arrest Whitney, but Whitney steps back in shock and is accidentally run over by another car. The timer runs out and Whitney wakes up in the lab, dazed. He doesn't know how to use the automatic doors and begins touching everything aimlessly. A guard, noticing his strange behavior on the security cameras, alerts Douglas. As Douglas heads to the lab, Jane contacts McBain. Upon arriving at the company, Douglas finds the guard unconscious and without his weapon. He then discovers Whitney laughing at the television like it's something new. After exchanging a few words, Douglas realizes it's actually Ashton, who returned because Whitney died in the accident. Douglas explains to Ashton that his world is fake too, but Ashton still wants to see where he was born. They ride the elevator together, and at that moment, David, Jane's husband, takes control of Douglas's body. Without revealing his identity, he accompanies Ashton to the simulation control room. While Ashton observes the computers, David finds the guard's weapon and shoots him twice, killing him. David then meets with Jane, pretending to be Douglas. As they kiss, he reveals his true identity and strikes her for defiling herself with another man. He throws her onto the bed and begins strangling her, but Jane manages to hit him on the head with an alarm clock. She runs to the elevator while David fires at her, but she manages to close the doors just in time. Enraged, David shoots at the elevator doors, but the bullets don't pierce them. Jane reaches the lobby, only to discover the exit doors are locked. David catches up to her and prepares to shoot, but misses and breaks a window. McBain, who had arrived after Jane's call, shoots David just in time. Jane had planned from the beginning for her husband to die in Douglas's body, trapping his consciousness in the simulation. Now McBain knows the truth and asks her not to send more people from her world into this one. Moments later, Douglas wakes up in David's real body, finding himself in the year 2024. Jane also wakes up and shows him the futuristic world she lives in. On the beach, she waves at her father, whose face was used to design Hannon. I hope you enjoyed the video.